Here we are. Welcome back, everyone. Good to gather with you again. I suppose virtually gather as we have been for the last couple weeks. There was a comment made, Dave, by you a couple of our episodes ago, and you said God does his best work in caves. And that led us down another rabbit trail about places that God works and places that he might be working in each of us as it relates to our current circumstances, whatever that might be for you and I or the people that are watching. So let's just jump right in. Let's talk about caves.
Okay. Well, actually, I don't remember what I was talking about when I talked about that, but I kind of do. Actually, that's a metaphor. It comes out of that story of David, and when in his life he was because of Saul's jealousy, King David, in 1 Samuel, ended up spending 10 years running all over the place in this place of disruption, and the cave would be a symbol of that disruption and things that aren't going the way you thought they would. And we were talking a little bit earlier about this when we were talking about whether to do this. It's an iconic story theme that God does some of his best work, deepest work in us in difficult places. Cave is a difficult place. Another place is the wilderness, Exodus 13. That's a talk that Open Door, I think, knows pretty well, called the roundabout way of God. Because I'm going to go that way and I'm going to go fast, and it's the promise of God. And I end up going, God is even kind of bringing me in an entirely different direction. And what's behind a lot of that is that our agendas aren't always the same. My agenda is to get there quick, and his agenda is to make me grow up or help me grow up or other things. Anyway, stuff like that. So the cave is a picture of that. It's a place of desolation. It's a place that you do not want to be. One of the parallels, we don't want to overdo it with the coronavirus, but I just think these biblical stories, they're kind of true all the time. And but in the cave experience of David and the wilderness experience of the people of God who were in this wilderness that they didn't want to be in, and God actually led them there, Exodus 13, is that it was extended. It was way longer than, it wasn't like a bad week or day. I mean, it took a while for even some of the deep things of God to happen in the people and in David. It takes a while. Because if we can get out of that stuff quick, there's nothing, we just get out. There's nothing to learn, and there's nothing formed in us. And anyway, that's how we talked about, or why we started talking about the cave.
Yeah, and part of, I don't know if this will lead our discussion any further, if you'll have anything to add on top of this, but part of what's fascinating to me about the wilderness or the cave is I'm noticing in my own life, I have a decision to make. So I can let the wilderness or the cave be a place of bitterness, anger, and I can choose that. And none of those things are bad, but what choice am I going to make when I enter into that place? Yeah. When those interruptions come, when God chooses to bring me the roundabout way, or whether I've run away and hidden in a cave. What are the choices that David made so that the cave would have long-lasting benefits? Yeah. What are the choices that the Israelites made in the wilderness that had generational, long-lasting benefits?
Holy cow, don't get me going on that one. That's so weird too, because like there's a choice you make and that has a benefit. I think a lot of times the desert experiences form things in us. The cave experiences form things in us. They also reveal things about us. I mean, one of the characteristics of the people of God when they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness was what you just said about the bitterness and just their whining and complaining, and it's somebody else's fault. And man, that stuff, I mean, I didn't get burned off for everybody, but that's something that needs to get burned off. And deserts have a way of doing that. It doesn't mean that everybody grows up though when they're going through a hard time. That's the other thing. Anyway, we're kind of scattered here. Part of the story of David, though, that was interesting, and it is also part of the wilderness iconically story. Not just that they're similar stories, but they're kind of the same. The thing about David and the wilderness is both of those experiences in the scriptures, they kind of start with this sense of promise. In the wilderness, the people of God they just got out of Egypt, and so they're redeemed, if you will. So they're like, hey, we're out of that baloney. And then it says in Exodus 13 that they were supposed to, the promised land was by the way of the Jebusite and the Hittite and the Canaanite and all these ites. And they knew where that was. I mean, physically knew where that was, and it wasn't very far. And you just get across the Sinai Peninsula, 2 weeks, they're there. So there's that sense of the promised land. It's the promise of God. And so instead of 2 weeks, God brought them on the roundabout way. And so there's a lot of what with that. I mean, I thought God was gonna, that kind of stuff. Same thing with David. Early on in the story, I can't remember, First Samuel early. You know the story where Samuel went to Jesse and was looking for the son that was to be king, and they identified David. So David gets anointed as king, and with an anointing like that, you're the king. There's some promise in that. The promise is you're the king, and it's good to be king. Anyway, that's a Mel Brooks line. Anyway, needs context to be funny. Anyway, but I digress. So anyway, he ended up going through the season, and it's the same thing of it's going to happen right there. It's right close because he becomes a rising star in Israel. He is anointed king. Then the Goliath thing where he kills the giant. All of a sudden he's again this big kind of stud guy. Ends up being a warrior in Saul's army. He's working in the court of Saul, the king, as a musician, and so he's got all this position and status. The people in the streets started singing, Saul has killed his thousands, David's killed his, so he's the guy. And I mean, he's on a fast track. And a funny thing happened on the way to the throne, and it was Saul's jealousy. And so Saul represents this disruption. The same thing with the wilderness. It's a disruption. It's not the way I wanted to go. It's not what I expected. I don't know how to do it. This I just don't know how to. I wasn't ready for this. The desert metaphor is it's hot. You're unprotected in a desert. There's no shelter. People die in the desert, in the caves, in those kinds of places. I mean, I just love all the symbolism of those kinds of things. And anyway, but when Saul started being jealous, David lost everything. I don't remember every single thing, but he lost. Well, it says that David was playing one day, and Saul was so angry at him that he picked up a spear, threw it at him, wanting to pin him to the wall. Anyway, he threw it hard, is what I'm thinking. Get it? If you pin him hard, that'd be really anyway. Pretty angry thing. So he lost his position, kind of his job as a warrior, his status. He lost his wife, Michal. He had married Saul's wife, and when David ran for his life, Saul said, I'm going to take her back. That's weird. You could do that then. Anyway.
Not anymore.
He lost his mentor. Samuel died. He lost his best friend because he couldn't be with Jonathan anymore, so he lost everything. He lost his self-respect in, I can't remember the chapter, 24 or something. Anyway, he comes to the king of Gath, which is where Goliath was from, and these two stories are in juxtaposition, kind of cool, because he starts pounding on the gates of Gath, that's the city, and the king is Achish, and so David wants to get in to be protected, but he doesn't want him to know who he is because he killed Goliath, so he starts acting like a madman, dribbles in his ear, and is acting like an idiot. And Achish says, "Isn't that David?" And yeah, and then he says, he's acting like a madman. And this is a paraphrase, but he actually says, "I have plenty of them. I don't need any more of them." The point is, David lost his self-respect. I mean, the juxtaposition of his boldness when nobody else wanted to face Goliath. He does, and now to the sniveling thing is there. Wow, he's in a different place. You know, in terms of his life, what you even would think is his character and stuff like that. And then the whole cave thing kind of kicks in, and it becomes more of this thing where he starts to settle into this, I don't know, a new normal for him, I guess. We use that language around what we're in right now. But anyway, so that's the story.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about these different questions that I think so often are the first to rise up when we find ourselves in caves or wildernesses, whether you want to address that spiritually, emotionally, physically. There are these questions that rise up when we are in places like that. And it's so often, what did I do to deserve this? Or what did I do wrong? Or why am I here? And
Right.
then what is God up to?
Right.
If we're even, sometimes I'm in those places and the scary questions I ask about God are, is he even here? Was
Right.
he even there in the first, is he even here in the first place?
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the, you know, that it just sounds like the iconic theme I said at the beginning was God does some of his deepest work in caves. So he's incredibly active in wilderness experiences. But when you're actually in a wilderness, what you feel is that God is absolutely doing absolutely nothing. That he's not, it's part of the wilderness experience are at least part of that experience is that you feel like you've been abandoned by God. And, you know, you make this preachy declaration, he does his best work in, you know, wildernesses, but when you're actually in one, there's not a strong sense of presence, and you feel abandoned very often by God. So even that whole thing of needing to work through those kind of feelings. And to be honest with you, Annika, sometimes it's part of the experience and what God is up to. He's not in a hurry. That's another thing about the wilderness thing. It's 2 weeks to get to the promised land, and we go this other way. And so he's just not in a hurry, and because some of the deeper things take time. What was I going to say? I can't remember. Kind of ADD moment. I saw a squirrel right out there. Got my attention.
What color was he? Brown?
No. Okay. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm debating. I mean, I so identify with so many of these things that we're talking about.
Okay.
Personally, I think even if we want to talk Corona, and again, we don't want to overdo that, but right before this hit, my husband, your son, was right on the verge of a big career move. It's
SWAT team
stalled out.
Yeah.
We were honestly, after, again, I'm getting vulnerable, after about 10 years of pretty bad financial hardship and having to let our house go, we were making some financial headway. I mean, that is stalled out. So if you want to talk about like interruption and frustration and feel like, what do we do wrong? Or I think about last summer and some conversations that you and I got in about, it kind of reminds me of your sabbatical from hell. We had this horrible summer. Everything's breaking. Everything we touch falls apart. People are sick. And the first question that rises up is, where is God and why is this happening? And it starts to remind me of another conversation we've had, which is your waves of resistance.
Oh, yeah.
And how the waves of resistance come. But now we're ending up down lots of rabbit trails, aren't we?
Yeah. No, that's great.
Let's go back to the cave.
Well, what I was going to say about when it feels like there's a disruption and we're asking why. Another thing that we do a lot is that we start to blame. We blame God, okay, and then it can't be God, it must be Satan. So that we get all spiritual warfare-y about it, and we blame ourselves. I obviously am stupid. I thought I was listening to God, but I'm not, obviously, because if I was actually listening to God, I wouldn't have this problem. Wonderfully confronted in the Numbers 13, because it was God who led him around by the way. So it's a directionally challenged cloud and pillar that they're following. The why stuff is just, I think the why stuff is stuff we have to go through. I think that is what I was starting to talk about before I saw the squirrel a bit ago, that I think all of that is part of the process. Those feelings of abandonment from God, I think we have to be in that long enough to be able to authentically even let it go. And that's why some of these things take time. So.
Yeah, I think too, and where we've decided to end today is actually the great hope that we can hold on to. So if we can
I want to get that one. We talked about shortcuts.
Oh, talk shortcuts.
Remember that? That was another thing that we do that.
Yes.
We didn't get into the whole story here, but one of the things around David and what there was kind of this thing that he did pretty well. And it's like this iconic truth. When you're in a wilderness or a cave, there's some things you need to be careful of. One is to lament. That is what David did. David lamented. So go ahead and be sad and be mad and get in God's face, do all that stuff. The second thing was at one point he inquired of the Lord, and then the Lord said to go, and that was to go rescue some people he was supposed to go rescue. So what are you going to do? That would be, so lament. Your marriage is a mess. Lament.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, keep lamenting. Okay, enough. Get off your lament and go. What are you going to do? Like that. The third thing is avoid quick fix, shortcuts. Because we're real vulnerable to quick fix things when we're in the desert, because anything that will medicate it, remove it, help me get out of it quick, I'll do it. The wonderful story about this for David was that I think it was 1 Samuel 24. He's in the cave during the deeper recesses of the cave, and Saul, who's looking for him and is out with his men, ends up coming into that cave. And the text says, delicately, he went in to relieve himself. He was taking a dump, is what he was doing. And I don't know why. Can that go on this thing? Because I don't know why we take those. I think we leave them. So he was doing that. He was doing his business in the cave, and his men, David's men, were going, this is it. This is the Lord's provision. In fact, that's even the wording. Behold, God has delivered him into your hands as, this provision. But it was a shortcut, and David knew it, and it would have gotten him out of the situation. It would have relieved the pressure. It would have, it would have kind of fixed things, but it would have damaged his soul. It was the wrong thing to do, and he knew it. And so, with some sense of humor, I think, I don't know how he did this, but evidently Saul was squatting, and then David snuck up on him, and the text says he cut some of his robe from his robe while he was doing his business. And then Saul went out, and I don't think this is in the text, but he did notice it because he felt a draft and his butt was hanging out. Anyway, I love these junior high stories. They're in the Bible. I don't make this up. But the point was that he would not touch the Lord's anointing. I mean, he was just not going to do that. One of the things that Richard Rohr talks about relative to Jonah and the whale, that's another iconic truth about pain. It's a 3-day thing, and don't get out of the belly. Don't leave the belly too soon. Let this thing do what it's supposed to do in you, and it takes time. So anyway, blah, blah, blah.
So that brings us to the, I think, great hope that we have when we recognize that we are in a wilderness, we are in a cave. It's lament. It's going to take time, right?
Right.
Don't give up too soon.
Shortcuts.
Be aware of the tempting places to take shortcuts. And then what is this great hope? What is the other business that God does in caves?
Well, this is actually this is the punchline of the whole cave talk, and it's what I told you about, and was kind of, let's do that one, because it fits Easter too, and it's simply this, that God knows about caves, and it's because he's been in caves, he's been in a cave, and Jesus was called the son of David, and like David, this is where the story is interestingly similar. Jesus lost his position, his popularity, his safety, his security, lost the adoration of the crowd on Palm Sunday, where everybody was singing Hosanna, Hosanna on Good Friday. That adoration is gone. He was threatened by his enemies. He was abandoned by his friends. He was lied about and despised. And finally, they nailed him to a cross, and he died, but then they made this really big mistake. And I love this part, because they took him down from that cross and they put him in a cave. And they thought that that was the end of him, but they forgot something very important. They forgot that God does his best work in caves. Kaboom, drop the mic, resurrection, that's the story.
I mean, happy Holy Week.
Happy week. Wait. No, it's the other way. I get it.
Happy Holy Week. We just gave away the secret of the end of the week.
You know, that thing I just did is much more fun to do, like a rap in front of like a couple thousand people. Anyway.
I mean, I wouldn't say what you do is considered rapping, but maybe
No,
close.
it's not. But I yell. I just yell.
Yeah.
So.
God does do his best work in caves, and this was a great conversation. Happy Holy Week.
Happy, I like this. Happy week.
I think this is where we sign. I think this is where we sign off.
I've ruined Easter for everyone. At least for my wife, if she's out there listening. She said, Dave, you can't do this anymore.
She's listening, but she's also rolling her eyes.
Thanks for doing this, Annika.
Yeah, this is
Thanks
fun.
for pulling me along into this. Thank you. And bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.